Today I'll be creating a program that's quite a bit different from the one that is on the sheet, so there's not much need to look at the sheet. Yes, I like to break the rules sometimes. Anyways, thank you for being here. I will start today with a delightful piece by the Polish composer Frédéric Chopin, a waltz of his in A-flat major, it's a brilliant piece. It's like a dance, one of those 18th, 19th century ballroom dances, very elegant, very classy. I hope you enjoy this little appetizer before we get into the bulk of the program. thank you so much. Yeah, this is a very nice piano, as Dimitri mentioned. It is truly a great pleasure to be able to, play on such a magnificent instrument. And I will be continuing the program with 3 much more serious pieces. I'll first play the Chopin Polonaise-Fantasy in A-flat major, and just a disclaimer, a lot of this is very, philosophical and yeah, very meditative. So, I think if you let yourself go, and if you want to kind of fall asleep through the performance, I think that's also a great compliment to the music itself. It is that kind of music that's supposed to put you in a trance. Of course, there's a lot of drama as well. But in any case, the Polonaise-Fantasy is about kind of Chopin's will to return back to Poland after he was in exile because of the Warsaw Revolution that was happening in the 1800s. Chopin only lived for 39 years in his life, unfortunately. But basically, the Polonaise is a Polish dance that is very, very nationalistic, and the fantasy is, of course, something that we all have fantasy, right? We all dream of things, and basically this is a dream to return to his homeland, but it never happens in his life, and it never happens for another 150 years before the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the rest is history. But yes, I hope you enjoy. Thank you. I always find it such a journey to play this piece because there's a lot of meandering, and I think that's the kind of joy of this music. I think both for the listener as for the interpreter. The next piece I'll be playing is very different. It is by a composer called Franz. He was Chopin's contemporary, also lived in the 1800s, but his lifespan was probably twice as long. It was probably twice as long. Anyways, and this piece is very, very interesting. The Mephisto Waltz by Franz, who's a very Hungarian composer, and it's inspired by a Faust legend, Mephisto, and there's a lot of temptation in this piece, as you might know. Mephisto is a devil, and there's a lot of elements to this piece. But at the beginning, we have a lot of kind of fifth in the. You'll see me pounding away at them. But anyways, they're supposed to represent Mephisto trying to tune a violin or tune several violins, for that matter, perhaps. And that's how I guess Mephisto lures Faust into his little trap. And there's a lot of kind of fighting back and forth between this kind of these two characters. And of course, Faust is very tempted to give in to what Mephisto has to offer. And you'll hear a lot of, I guess, devilish things. And it's a very cute piece, I think. It is very devilish, but I think it's also very cute. So I hope you enjoy. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, this is quite a wild piece, but I hope you could have heard a little bit of the temptation and the devil, especially towards the end. I think that for me, of course, with the piano we don't have any lyrics, but for me, I think the devil, in some ways, took over, and perhaps the two merged into one character. I know there's a story, a more concrete story behind it, but that's, anyways, my own interpretation. And yeah, I guess it'd be interesting to hear from you guys afterwards. Kind of what kind of characters or storyline emerged from your thoughts. All right, so the final piece on the program, it's a bit long. It is the Chopin Third Piano Sonata in B minor, roughly around 25 minutes or so. It is divided in 4 movements. I would say it probably, covers almost all the emotions we experience in life. And it is such a richly packed piece. In the first movement already, you'll hear kind of a very, very strong character. And then as soon as things calm down, that's kind of where the second theme takes off, and things kind of turn into longer lines. But there's a lot of, I guess, paradoxes in this piece between kind of jagged movements and long lines, or very delicate stuff, to very kind of massive sound worlds. And I'll let the music speak for itself. One more thing, in the third movement there will be this movement in the middle that'll be around 9-10 minutes. It's very slow, but I would say it's probably also like a similar meditation kind of thing, and a lot of reflections about the past. And one more thing that I should note is that Franz and Chopin, although they were both romantic, I would say Chopin's music is probably much more inward-looking, much more kind of looking towards the past, reflecting on the past. Liszt's music is kind of known for being more forward-looking, and it is probably more visceral in terms of you being inside a world, whereas Chopin, the world is inside of you. And so I hope you enjoy. you know, about at least over a dozen worlds. So I hope you felt what I did. And yeah, I guess I'll open the floor to some questions if any one of you guys wants to, you know, ask anything or chat.
What's your favorite instrument to play on? Steinway or?
Yeah, the question was what's my favorite instrument? I would say, yeah, probably the Steinway. I really like, especially the older German pianos that have a lot of history. I think they have a lot of girth and a lot of depth, and at the same time, they're really colorful. Yeah, so this is probably my favorite. Yes. Oh, well, yeah, so mentally, so the question was where am I mentally when I'm playing these pieces? Ideally, I would be, you know, in a state of, I guess, trance and, you know, tapping into the subconscious and, you know, not really actively thinking. Of course, that's really hard to do, and it's rarely actually the case. We try our best, but when you try, it doesn't work, right? So it's one of those things where, I try to just be somewhere else. maybe look. See, I do sometimes. I do try to look away so that I don't, I'm not distracted by the physical stuff. But sometimes you do have to look at, and so yeah. What kept me motivated to keep playing? I would say this is probably, for me, honestly, my love for classical music in general was quite gradual. I think it, for me, aged a bit like, wine, I would say. I was actually started off by my mother, who is also a piano teacher. She still teaches mostly to children. But I wasn't one of those people who was, like when I was 5, I was like, I'm going to be a pianist or anything to do with music. But through just a lot of, I guess, discovering the repertoire, discovering pieces like this, and I just through experience, through maturity, I've, fallen in love with so much of this wonderful music, and I would say that's probably the main thing.
Yes, that was one of my questions is, how did you get started? Obviously, you've been playing for a long time. And then I also wanted to know, with those longer pieces like that, how do you remember so much?
Oh yeah, so for sure it takes a lot of time, of course, a lot of time, and this is not my first time playing, either of these 3 pieces, but I would say, it's kind of like similar to memorizing a poem or a script. I normally just go kind of for the general kind of meaning, taking in what this is supposed to transmit, kind of, and I think also memorizing music is easier than memorizing words, at least for me, and so I would say it's really kind of the overall arc of the music that guides me. That's very touching. Thanks so much for sharing that. Thank you. Really, that's for us. I guess as musicians, I guess that's kind of like the most meaningful thing. So thank you so much. I also want to say actually probably another thing that made me fall in love with classical music more is that because there are no lyrics, you kind of have to make up your own story, and I think that gives, at least for me, a lot of time, a lot of space to reflect, a lot of times to ponder, to contemplate, to feel, and to not have boundaries, and so I guess that's also why I love music so much, this kind of music, for numbers. Yes.
Watching you play, listening to you play, obviously was breathtaking. One of the things that I really enjoyed the most was how you set up each piece and kind of make that background as each piece kind of gives some kind of background of what's going on with that. How much of that is what drives you to enjoy what the original was?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would say honestly, in this way, it's very similar to acting. It's similar to acting. Of course, what we see on the screen is probably like 0.01%, but a lot of it is context. A lot of it is history and your understanding of the history. And I think that really, I guess, shapes kind of your interpretation. And of course, you also bring in what you see from the world. You try to relate to the composer in your own way. And what we have in the end, of course, it's also the way I played this yesterday was totally quite different from how I played today, I think. It also depends on, it's like, seeing a person yesterday and today, it's going to be different each day a little bit, so yeah. Emotions. I don't know, I guess in today's performance I did feel a little bit of relief in the times in the slower sections. I would say that even in my own performance, I felt more comfortable to kind of take a bit more time to float a bit more. that is very kind of emotionally complex. So it really did feel good in some ways to, you know, be able to squeeze out some of that last toothpaste. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I think it's always a marvel to watch class right and craft. I appreciate you coming in here. Be here. Do you prefer to stick to romantics like Chopin and Franz, or do you have any favorite dishes?
Yeah, thank you so much for your comments and for your kind words. I'm quite a romantic soul, I think. I do lean towards the romantics. Well, I also think that they're probably the most easy to kind of understand, especially also, you know, in case there's anyone here who hasn't been exposed to classical music before, because it is kind of more emotional. There are other kind of genres like classical or baroque, where the music is much more cerebral, and, you know, especially if, you know, it's I guess only kind of like a musician would be able to appreciate it more. But I love the romantics. I do also very much like Bach. I like, I guess, some contemporary work as well. It's, you know, kind of really out there and explores a lot of new things, you know, like effects or, you know, different kind of stuff. So,
As this question last week, when starts came, I'm a big sports guy, so I always wondered, like, when they interview the experienced athlete, they ask, like, who's the toughest pitcher you face, or who's the most best defender you face? Is there, like, a piece that is, like, been very challenging for you, or that you want to accomplish that you haven't before?
yeah, I guess that's twofold because I'll stick with the classics for now. So probably there was a piece that I played very recently called Bartok's Second Piano Concerto. It is, you know, a piano with, like, you know, 8 members with string and brass and whatever orchestra, and that piece was really very difficult to put together. And it's known as one of those pieces that is, you know, that breaks the hands a little bit, and it was also kind of prohibited from actually some of the big competitions for a while, and only recently is this piece being allowed. So I would say that's probably one of the most difficult pieces that I've played. And then probably also I've been, you know, trying to tackle a little bit also some of the Art Tatum, you know, transcriptions. He was a phenomenal jazz pianist, and I think to get that groove and to have, you know, that kind of technique to play what he did was also something that I think I haven't performed it, but I do find it quite challenging. Yeah, so maybe in some other genres. Oh, when I practice, that's very interesting. Thank you for a comment. When I practice, I don't know, it really depends on the day, but actually for us, we have to try to get used to different kinds of pianos, because we're always playing on different kinds of pianos. I think it's a luxury, of course, if we're able to practice with a concert band, but honestly, I don't think it's very ideal, because it gives you too much and your expectations become too high. I actually really love practicing on uprights. I think they are, because I think uprights are very cozy, and also they're not too loud, and especially if you're like kind of like listening to this, you know, for so many hours a day, you don't want tinnitus, you know, that kind of stuff. Oh, I have tried in the past. I don't think there's anything that is good enough to be in the public eye. It's something that I'm very slowly working on, but I hope to be able to write more and perhaps release. And it doesn't, it's not necessarily classical either, does it? But yeah, I try. But it's a totally different craft, but doing my best.
I'm just curious, why Harvard Economics?
Why Harvard Economics? I mean, the very clear-cut answer is that you know, it's very difficult to make a career out of music. So I did think of, you know, not pursuing this as a career. Of course, I'll always have music in my life, but I think that's the one. When I guess, I mean, as I am going through this journey, the thing that I realize is that making music and the actual industry cannot be further apart. You know, having a career, of course, you have to play decently, but then once you pass a certain threshold, you know, it becomes a lot of, you know, business, networking, etc. And so I thought for a while to transition into something a bit more stable, but I'm glad I came back. Thank you.
I have one more question to Tony. Why are you here?
Thank you, Dimitri. I could have already anticipated it. It's your favorite question. But I'm very, very, very happy to share. I first encountered looking at the stars through a documentary called Reclamation. And it features a former inmate from Ontario, and he kind of talks about a lot about his life, his journey, his experiences, etc. And then there's also some music to go with it, live music. And there were 3 musicians, a cellist, a violinist, and a pianist. And it so happens to be that the violinist was someone who I saw as my mentor for about 12 years or even more. And yeah, I was so moved really by this documentary. And all of the interest, the curiosity started to come in. And also seeing kind of how that one example has been kind of changed from music. I thought, with this gift, I also want to, maybe do something a bit more meaningful, less commercial. And I feel that this is also a place where it's less judgmental than the rest of the world. And yeah, I honestly feel like for me it is really such a great honor, and I'm so grateful that you're allowing me to, I guess, be a part of your world for a moment, and you're allowing me to share a part of my world. So yeah.
Just don't go away. So, first of all, thank you very much. I can't thank you enough. We can't thank you enough. I know Tony can't thank you enough. Actually, the reason we're here is exactly because of you. Because of how you listen, because of what you say, because how do you think, how do you feel, how do you respect music, art? How does it take you away for a few minutes to places that you want to be? And that's something, we are very proud to bring to you. And that feeling you cannot experience anywhere else. And I think Tony will agree with me. And that's when we'll be coming back. Before we wrap up, by the way, what you see on the screen, you see James Ruston, who was incarcerated for about 32 years before he was paroled. We did a documentary about him, which Tony has seen. So I'm just showing you the glimpse of it. You can see it on YouTube. It's called Reclamation. He spent almost 30 years in prison before coming to our performance and before we lifted him up from depression. We helped him get out of depression. And then we made a documentary about his life. So each of your lives, and I don't mean to bullshit, okay? We know that each and every story is unique. And we can't judge, and normally judge people, including myself. This program is teaching me personally, get rid of judgment. And don't rush to put label on people who may be here or there. So you're helping with those type of reactions, with what you're saying, with the fact that, and that we all broken. So with this in mind, I'd like to ask Tony to maybe do this for us. Okay, you can do anything. You can listen, you can sing if you feel like it. We send you the verses. I don't know whether you received them or not. And by the way, this is something that Tony doesn't do, for living, for himself. It's something that I asked him to do. As I did last time, if you remember, I asked musicians to do Over the Rainbow, right? So every every time we come to you, do something which kind of get us away closer to simplicity, okay? And lastly, what you got today is a program that normally is presented in big halls. How did you listen? You listen better than all of them, okay? Your phones didn't ring, okay? Your jewelry didn't rustle, okay? Your gadgets were switched off. Okay? Where did you see this? Where can you find this? Glenn Gould, the Canadian, big, an ultimate pianist. Okay? And he lived to the day when I started my charity. He wouldn't leave this place. Okay? He quit stage because he couldn't put up with what I just said. With this futile hassle on the outside. So, Tony. stars really close. Jolene of the Roberto, you probably know who she is. She actually climbed Kilimanjaro, and she has seen the sky and the stars. By the way, no one asked the question why looking at the stars, but we'll talk about it next time. So thank you, Jolene, for looking at the stars together with us. I'd like to thank Shannon for continuously being our support. I'd like to thank, obviously, not the support, she's recording, and she is also participating in our musical activity. I'd like to thank the host, Chris Risch. She is not here, but I think that she has a lot to do with hosting this. I'd like to thank I'd like you to take time to fill up those questionnaires, okay? Not now. Go back, relax, reflect, and then return them to religious channel. Okay, that's it. So, and again, it's a threat. I'll try to carry it out, so we'll come back. Most likely in late November, early December. God given and not being supportive. Finally, let's listen to Katie Lang. You can sing along. This is my favorite rendition of Hallelujah. Leonard Cohen believed that this particular rendition is the best of his song. So I thought that we can start leaving and watching and listening to this. And thank you again for what you did by hosting us the way that you hosted, okay? That is what brings us back. You, okay? Nothing else. All right. Thank you.